Our next speaker is Jihoon Suk, from a PhD student of Korean modern history at Yonsei University in Seoul, South Korea. His master's thesis, which is also from Yonsei, is the formation, and dissemination of Korean traditional music in the 1930s. It contained extensive historical research on the impact of Korean record industry in the reshaping and popularizing of what modern Koreans refer to as Korean traditional music, or gudak. And he can perhaps pronounce that better than I. Since 2010, he has been working as a senior researcher at the Korean 78 RPM Discography Project and Archive, the largest collection and research initiative of Korean commercial 78 RPM recordings made between 1906 and 1945. He's conducted research for various Korean archives and public institutions, the Korean National Archives, the Independence Museum of Korea, the Korean National Assembly Library, and so on. He's also a co-moderator of the 78 RPM Records and Cylinder fan group on Facebook, one of the largest groups on Facebook for enthusiasts of vintage sound recordings. Now, I will attempt to play his video, and if this doesn't work, I'm sure he can help us out. Here we go.
Thank you, Tim. It is surely an honor to start this presentation with an introduction by someone who I'm most grateful for this research. Again, the title of this presentation is How George W. Johnson Achieved Immortality in Korea. It might be a little bit too grandeur of a title to actually understand for what I'm going to say today, so let me start this presentation by telling you a little bit of my personal story. When I was about 5 or 6, I heard my piano teacher at school playing a rather funny song on the keyboard. Titled A Trip to Seoul, this was not only a really catchy tune, but each refrain was all made of laughs. I was fascinated by it, and the little scholar inside of me wanted to know who actually wrote the song. But surprisingly, no published scores, of which there were plentiful, had any composer credits. They all said 작자 미상, or composer lyricist unknown. This song remained a bit of mystery for a long time, until I was in the middle school. This was around 2002, and I just began my collecting of vintage sound recordings. There weren't that many resources available anywhere, but I stumbled across with a few websites from the US where there were some useful information. One of these websites was called tinfoil.com. For those who don't know, this was a website where you can hear transfers of early wax cylinders as real media files. I bet that particular file format is now even more elusive than the actual wax cylinders. Anyway, to my absolute surprise, there was a short clip of this black singer, George W. Johnson, singing the laughing song. And despite some little differences here and there, I instantly recognized the tune as this little mystery tune that I have been curious about for years. Fast forward to about 2005 when I was in high school. By that time, my English had improved quite a bit, and I began to read academic books in English. And one of the big English books that they had in our local library was this book called Lost Sounds by Tim Brooks. And this is when I finally learned a lot about the history of this song and the man behind it. Again, I am most grateful to what Mr. Brooks have uncovered, but here I am going to add a little bit more. You might call it a postscript to what Mr. Brooks has written. As many of you know, The Laughing Song by George W. Johnson was one of the biggest hits of the 1890s, and it was arguably one of the very first songs to be popularized entirely by the means of pre-recorded musical format. And it was through this form, an early brown wax cylinder, that the song was first introduced in Korea a few years before the turn of the 20th century. Among the many precious one-of-a-kind documents held at the New York Public Library are the personal papers of Horace Newton Allen, a very interesting figure of his own right and a very important historic figure in modern Korean history. Born in 1858 in Delaware, Ohio, he was trained as a medical doctor and became a Presbyterian missionary in 1883. Initially sent to China as a medical missionary, he had a hard time there, so he decided to go to Korea instead in the following year. He was one of the first Presbyterian missionaries sent to this hermit kingdom. Since Korea still did not allow Christianity to be preached, he initially went there as a doctor, But following a very dramatic incident in late 1884, when he saved the life of the Queen's cousin from an assassination attempt, he became a super influential figure in Korea. Not only he became the director of the first Western-style hospital and medical school in Korea, he also became quite well acquainted with the high circle in Korea, ultimately becoming the official ambassador of the United States to Korea in 1897. Some of you here who heard my presentation last year may even remember his name, because Alan was the very person who was given a task to present Edison's special presentation phonograph given to the King of Korea in August 1890. Besides this, he was very interested in phonographs himself, having purchased an Edison home phonograph in late 1896 and began to actively collect pre-recorded cylinders for his personal enjoyment. He had sent several orders of phonograph-related items, mostly cylinders, to the American Trading Company in New York. And it is among these letters that we find the first mention of our old friend George W. Johnson. In a letter dated September 7, 1897, Allen sent yet another order for some pre-recorded cylinders and enclosed a handwritten 5-page list of cylinders that he wanted to purchase. While I could not take photocopies of this list due to its fragility, I can report that there is a mention of a cylinder listed as Nigger Laughing Song Johnson. This is almost certainly referring to our old laughing song, sung by George W. Johnson. Allen continued to purchase cylinders until 1901 when he sold his entire collection to Walter Townsend, an American merchant in Korea. And by that time, his collection of cylinders has grown to over 300 records, as seen from another letter from him, which is no small achievement in those days, I presume. We at the Korean 78 RPM Discography Project happen to have a very nice copy of a Columbia brown wax cylinder of Johnson's Laughing Song, which is probably of the same vintage with what Dr. Allen had ordered. Here's a clip of our attempt to playing it. I know this has a lot of wow and flutter as it was transferred with an old Edison phonograph with a rather worn belt, but anyway, here it is.
The Laughing Song by Mr. George W. Johnson for the Columbia Phonograph Company of New York and Paris. As I was coming around the corner, I heard some people say, "Here comes the dandy darky, here he comes his way. His heel is like a snowplow, his mouth is like a trap, and when he opens it gently, you will see people gapping that I laugh." I got tell you from I got tell you from
By the early 1900s, the song became quite popular again, this time by the many versions recorded by Bert Shepard, mostly for the Gramophone and Typewriter Company in England. Here is an excerpt from the autobiography of a pioneering recording engineer, Fred Geisberg. Geisberg says that he taught this song to Shepard himself, and his version of the Laughing Song was still available in India, China, and Japan at the time of the book's writing. As many of you know, Uncle Fred was a bit of a storyteller of tall tales. But, in fact, it seems that it was quite true that Bert Shepard's version of the song was still available in some parts of Asia. Here's a 1905 recording of Shepard singing this song, but on a late 1930s Indian jonophone pressing.
As I was coming round the corner, I heard somebody say, "Here comes the dandy darky, oh, here he comes this way. His face him like a snowplow, his mouth him like a trap, and when he starts a-laughing, you see a fearful gap."
Bert Shepard's version of the Laughing Song was also indeed sold in Japan, but in a rather twisted way. During the early to mid-19-teens, there were dozens of small record companies in Japan that did not even have their own recording studios. All they did was to electroplate somebody else's records and press them cheaply. This was due to the fact that Japan did not have a copyright law that protected the rights related to pre-recorded music at the time. Anyway, the most successful pirate label at the time was Ugishu, which copied both Japanese titles and the foreign, i.e. Western titles. Among their most popular offerings was this record called Labs You Have Met, and despite the fact the label says that it was recorded in Japan, it was actually an electroplated copy of Victor 17232A, which was originally recorded by the Gramophone Company in 1906.
Ladies and what you brought with you. I beg leave to claim your attention for 3 minutes while I tell you of your few of my laughing friends, you know, just the sort of genial folk you meet in a day. First of all, then of course, you know, there's the entertainment coon. He's got a laugh that sort of makes you get on the giggle for the evening. Listen to it. This is his laugh.
As I was coming round the corner, I heard somebody say, here comes the dandy darky, oh, here he comes this way. His feet him like a snowplow, his mouth him like a trap, and when he starts laughing, you see a fear for gap.
But the real popular hit version of the Laughing song came to the form of The Laughing Policeman, a British adaptation of the song first introduced in 1922 by the English musical comedian Charles Penrose, who also went with the nom de disque of Charles Joly. He recorded several versions of this song from 1922 to 1936, but this particular version that became a huge hit in Japan in the mid-1930s was this rather seldomly heard, rather jazzy version, recorded in London on June 28, 1929.
Pass along there, please. I shan't tell you any more times. Will you pass along there? I know a fat old policeman, he's always on our street. A fat and jolly red-faced man, he really is a treat. He's too kind for a policeman, he's never known to frown. And everybody says he is the happiest man in town.
This record appears to have sold extremely well in Japan and its territories, judging from the number of surviving copies. It was this jazzed up version of the song that was again adapted into Korean.
시골 영감님께서 서울 구경을 떠나셨는데 참으로 유쾌한 장면이 많았겠다. 에헴. 시골 영감 처음 타는 기찻놀이랑 잡혀 파는 아가씨와 생각을 하네. 이 세상에 예물이 없는 장사가 어디 있나. 깎아내자고 졸라대니 원 이런 일생이야.
This Korean version you just heard was sung by Kang Hong-sik, an actor and a singer who was quite popular in the 1930s Korea. The title of this Korean version is 유쾌한 시골 영감, or A Funny Country Bumpkin, and it is listed as a jazz song. This record was recorded in Seoul on around April 23, 1936, and was issued June of that year by Nippon Columbia. As I said just now, this was considered to be a jazz song, a word that in the 1930s Korean music scene referred to any popular songs that had originated from America or other Western countries. In fact, the flip side of this record contains a cover version of Dinah. Yes, that Bing Crosby tune, sung in duet by Kang and the singer-actress An Myung-ok.
Dinah,
나의 아빠라인 그대여 힘있게 안아줘요 연약한 이 나의 나를
어여쁜 Dinah.
정열에 사는 그는 이끌는 그 가슴에 쓰러지리 몸이
Dinah, 언제나 그대의 사랑을 잊어버리지 아니하.
Now you just heard the song, but I know there are very few people here today who can understand Korean, so I will tell you what the song is all about. The song tells a story of an ordeal of an elderly country bumpkin who has his first train ride to get to Seoul. On his way, he encounters several challenges, and the song makes fun of him each time, but with some sympathies. So what can we say about this Korean version of the laughing song? The first is the obvious clash between the old and the new in the Korean society of the 1930s. The country bumpkin obviously had difficulties adjusting himself to this new modern world, something that thousands of Koreans living in the rural areas would have experienced at the time. This trouble might have been exacerbated by the fact that most of the modern infrastructures in Korea at the time, including the railway, was owned by the colonizing Japanese, as Korea was annexed by Japan as its colony since 1910. The fact that the singer Kang Hong-sik made much of his singing career by singing traditional folk song-inspired types of songs that usually argued for appreciation for the older way of life makes it quite intriguing to think that the song was maybe intended as a satire of some sort. In fact, the poet Yoo Do-sun, the man who is thought to be the author of these Korean lyrics, was known as a rather nationalist figure, so it does beg the question. Still, the song is listed as a jazz song, which was effectively banned by the Japanese government in the following year with the outbreak of the Sino-Japanese War of 1937. This was probably one of the reasons why this record is so elusive to find nowadays, as there are only 3 copies known to exist. Just a side note, there were also Japanese and Taiwanese cover versions of the song. Here is the Japanese version issued in 1939.
Solengaはこれでも運転手町から町へ乗り回す電卓はいかがと声かけりゃそよ風が笑って吹いてゆく
I'm still working on the histories of other Asian versions of this song, and hopefully I can present more findings about it for the ARSC in the future. Following Japan's defeat in World War II in August 1945, Korea was also liberated by the Allies. But the country was divided by the US and the Soviet Union into 2 separate entities. Many Koreans were forced to choose between the 2 radically different systems. But the communist North Korea initially promised state sponsorship on artists and cultural workers. And therefore, many leading artists, singers, actors, writers, painters, etc., decided to choose the North. Unfortunately for us, Kang Hong-sik also chose to go to the North, largely because of the fact that Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, was his hometown. Because of his choice, however, in return, the South Korean government banned any mention of his name in publications or in public record until 1988, and his works, films, records, etc., were deliberately destroyed. It seemed that because of all these turmoil, the laughing song was about to meet the same fate but that was not the case. In 1956, the song was all of a sudden revived by the team of two comedians, Yang Seok-chun and Oh Gil-lee, as 서울 구경, a trip to Seoul. It now became a comedy routine between the two people, the country bumpkin and a much younger woman, though the lyrics was unchanged.
영감님, 서울 다녀오셨다죠?
오냐?
그래 서울 구경은 잘하셨어요?
말 마라. 기차표 살적부터 사고 연발인데 내 기가 막힌 얘기 한 번 없게 들어보련. 처음 타는 시골 영감 기차놀이다. 차표 파는 아가씨와 승강이 났네. 아이 세상에 왜 누리 없는 장사가 어딨어. 깎아달라고 졸라대니 원 이런 짓세가.
By the late 1950s, several other comedians started to do the routine as well, and one of the most successful of these comedians was Seo Young-chun, who was a staple on Korean comedy theater and later television. Here are 3 short clips showing Mr. Seo performing this routine. The first 2 are from the government newsreels of the early 1960s, and the third one is from the early 1980s.
기차는 삐하고 떠나갑니다. 영감님이 깜짝 놀래 돈을 다 내면 깎지 않고 돈 다 낼 테니 나 좀 쳐다주. 저 차 좀 붙들어요. 돈 다 낼 테니.
기차가 띠하고 도착합니다. 영감님이 깜짝 놀라 돈을 다 내면
서울 시민회관에서 우리나라의 희극 배우들이 모두 모여서 희극 30년의 잔치가 베풀어졌는데 무더운 여름철 잠시 여러분을 웃음동산으로 모시겠습니다.
영감처럼 타는 기차놀이랑 차표 파는 아가씨와 신경이 하는 아이 세상에 왜 노리 없는 장사가 어딨어. 깎아달라고 졸라대니 원이란
With the success of Seo as a comedian, there came several cover versions of the laughing song in Korea throughout the 1970s and the 1980s. Personally, I have counted around 20 different cover versions of the song recorded between 1965 and 1988. My personal favorite version is this guitar duo version from 1976 that replaced the laughs with yodeling.
시골 영감 처음 타는 기차놀이다. 차표 파는 아가씨와 승객이 난데 이 세상에 우리 없는 장사가 어딨어. 깎아달라고 졸라대니 아이고 내 팔자.
The laughing song, or its Korean version, A Funny Country Bumpkin, or A Trip to Seoul, is still quite alive and well in Korea even in the 21st century, despite the fact that hardly anyone still don't know its origin. First is a straight performance of this song from 2018, followed by a choral arrangement version from 2019, then a TV commercial jingle for an energy drink from 2020, and finally, a video I found on YouTube showing a bunch of preschoolers just dancing to the tune for the kindergarten talent show.
장사 어딨어? 깎아달라 졸라대니 왕이 언제 1시 2시 3시 4시 얼어나는 시간 낚시 피시 입시 맵시 얼어나는 시 버시 택시 MC 색시 얼어나는 시 생긴 순간 필요한 얼어나는 시
Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed my presentation here, and it is really fascinating to think that George W. Johnson's Simple Little Way has practically achieved an immortality in Korea more than 130 years after the song first came out. Thank you.
Remarkable. I feel like I've been in the Twilight Zone here. We have a little bit of time for questions.
Yes. Yeah.
I can find the questions. I've got the chat here. Perhaps our tech can help me find where the Q&A is. There's chat.
Oh, it should be to the right of that on, it doesn't look like there are any Q&A questions yet for this one on the Hubelo page. But a lot of sounding off in the comments.
Okay, let me just mention that we had a presentation a few years ago about the afterlife of the laughing song in Brazil. Recordings made many, many years later there. I don't know if they're still making them or not, but this strange song seems to have had a very long life. However, the videos that you turned up of little children singing it and teen idols singing it is just remarkable.
Yeah, indeed it is. So.
You'll have to help me here with any questions that come up, because again, I can't seem to get them from my screen.
Well, somebody did ask. I'm actually checking on the live chat here, and I think Paul Johnson asked why do I think that this song took off as it did in Korea? And honestly, I don't have much answers to this. It's just one of those things that that just never went away, and I mean that's the easiest way easiest way to answer it, I suppose. And as I said, the first Korean version and the singer who went up to the North Korea eventually, you know, like as I said, like the whole public banning of those who went to the North was very severe. People just couldn't even like mention any of their names or like publicly actually discuss anything about their works, but somehow this song escaped that you know, persecution or like suppression, you might say, and just continued to be so popular. And and honestly, I don't know the reason for that, but yeah. But again, the record itself, which I have, I'm one of the lucky ones who actually have one of these 3 copies. That's yeah, I mean, again, it seems that this song initially, when it was offered as this first Korean version in 1936, was not a huge hit. Besides, I mean, for the fact that it only lasted in the catalog for less than a year, but somehow people just remembered it, and as a word of mouth, I think, and so.
Well, the whole genre of laughing songs, which was quite prominent actually during the late 19th and early 20th century in the U.S., went out of vogue eventually. Wasn't considered cool anymore, I guess. However, laughter is universal. I mean, that's you can see that on the face of the audience there. That woman in the audience, for example, she's having the time of her life, and that's laughter. That's not George Johnson or any particular lyrics or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So I think we sometimes get a little too sophisticated for our own good, to tell the truth. At any rate, do we have any? No, we don't have any Q&A, I guess. what I'm going to suggest, the next presentation is only 20 minutes. So if you could stick around, Jihoon, I think there'll probably be some time at the end to be able to answer.
Yeah, I will. And as I said, as I wrote tonight, in my live chat feed, I will be also in the lounge, at the lounge, or like Cupola Lounge, for further discussions. And for those who are who have much time for joining me and whatever, and we can just have some rather freestyle chat. So yeah,
that would be great. Thank you for staying up so long, so late, or so early, or whatever it is.